So that's the story of the Peninsular War. McGrigor became Director General of Army Medical Services in 1815, 1 week before the Battle of Waterloo. McGrigor's first job was to prepare medical services for the bloodiest battle in the Napoleonic Wars. In these fields, where the Battle of Waterloo was fought 20 miles south of Brussels, 30,000 French soldiers were killed or wounded out of a total strength of 72,000. This was more than 3 times the number of British casualties. McGrigor remained in post as Director General of Army Medical Services until 1851. Such were his major contributions to the health and well-being of the soldiers that he became known as the father of British Army Medical Services. This small statue of McGrigor is to be found at the Aberdeen Medico-Chirurgical Society. The full-size version was erected at the Royal Army Medical College at Millbank in London. But all the improvements that McGrigor put into place were either forgotten or were ignored by the time of the next major conflict, the Crimean War, when there were 4 times as many deaths from disease as there were from enemy action. The sick and the wounded had to be evacuated by ship from Balaclava harbour and were transported across the Black Sea from the Crimean Peninsula to hospitals in Scutari, now a suburb of Istanbul on the Bosphorus. Their destination was Barrack Hospital in Scutari, which was on the top of quite a steep hill. Frequently, the orderlies who were supposed to take them from the harbour to the hospital were too sick or too drunk to transport them, and they had to make their own way. Once there, they would be received and attended to by Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was a formidable character, as you will come to see in the PowerPoint presentation. Nightingale believed that malnutrition and exhaustion were responsible for the high death rate among soldiers from disease. Dr. James Barry was another strong-minded individual who believed that poor sanitation and blocked drains were the causes of disease. And this brought Dr. Barry into direct conflict with Florence Nightingale, as you will soon see. The first celebrity chef went to the Crimea, and he worked wonders by improving the nutrition of wounded soldiers. The chef in question was Alexis Soyer. He too was a very colourful character. Soyer invented a field stove which was still in use nearly 100 years later during the Second World War. In the wake of the medical disaster that was the Crimean War, changes were made to improve nutrition and accommodation for soldiers. The establishment of an army medical school at Fort Pitt in Chatham for 2 years, and then at Netley, near Southampton, paved the way for research and development. One of the most important measures introduced was the appointment of a sanitary officer to improve the living standards of soldiers, including provision of better nutrition and clean water. Demolished in 1966, all that remains of Netley Hospital now is the chapel. Just because a sanitary officer had been appointed did not necessarily mean that his advice was listened to. Field Marshal Sir Garnet Wolseley had a poor opinion of sanitary officers. His attitude, and others like it, ensured that there were twice as many deaths from disease than from enemy action in the last conflict involving Britain before the First World War, the Boer War. In 1898, the Royal Army Medical Corps was established. and medical officers at long last could provide useful advice about the nutrition of soldiers and might even be listened to. Sir Alexander Ogston, whose portrait hangs here, alongside that of Sir James McGrigor, played a pivotal role. Ogston worked tirelessly to reform medical services in the latter years of the 19th century. His efforts led him to be a member of a powerful medical group which lobbied the Secretary of State for War, Lord Lansdowne, for improved terms and conditions for medical officers. Other members of the lobbying group included Sir Thomas Granger Stewart, President-elect of the British Medical Association, and Surgeon General Mowat, VC, who was the first medical recipient of the Victoria Cross after saving a badly wounded officer in the charge of the Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava. Before moving on from Sir Alexander Ogston, it is important to point out that perhaps he is best known for his discovery of the Staphylococcus, which was, and still is, the commonest cause of surgical wound infection. The second PowerPoint section concludes with the closing conflict of the 19th century, the Second Boer War, where you will appreciate with dreadful clarity the impact of food deprivation on a civilian population. You could be forgiven for thinking that this photograph comes from a Nazi concentration camp in the Second World War as part of the final solution. But it is not. This is a British concentration camp to intern the wives and children of Boer farmers in an attempt to subdue them. The concentration camp was a British invention.